So this is around an AMA, means ask me anything, around architecting cloud agnostic and multi-cloud solutions. So if you've been hearing some of these buzzwords around cloud agnosticity, multi-cloud, etc., etc. So this is the place for you to ask your questions and then get clarity. We'll share our experiences. So this is me, Swami will also give a brief intro about ourselves. So this is about architecting, how to architect multi-cloud and cloud agnostic solutions. We don't have an preset content here. We want to hear from you, your understanding. We want to help you clarify your questions. So yeah, that's the context for this session. So just think about it, and then we'll get started in a few minutes.
Hey, good evening. My name is Arun.
Oh, we can't hear you.
Is it audible?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. My name is Arun. I always hear this word building an application to be independent of cloud. So my question is, I'm more into Azure. So I build a product with .NET using services like Cosmos, Service Bus, Azure Key Vault, and all of those things. So how can I make my product which can be independent of cloud? If I start thinking that way, I feel like I'm losing the key features of what the cloud provides. So what is that I can really do to deploy my app in AWS so that it starts using all the services, equivalent services in AWS, whether that is first thing is whether that is feasible. That's what I wanted to understand.
Okay, that's an excellent question. And that is the exact question even I have in my mind when someone talks to me about build a multi-cloud product, right? See, I think you are spot on your thought process as well, right? See, in the name of multi-cloud, we can't really lose the power of a single cloud where we are, right? And the multi-cloud also comes with the, first we need to understand why we are going multi-cloud, right? Some of those drivers needs to be defined clearly. Then that will help us in pick the right technology or services on that particular cloud. See, in your example, let's say Azure Key Vault is one of the key services to make everything secured. Right? That is something which you cannot make it like in cloud agnostic, right? So security definitely is one of the key constraints where we need to be leveraging some portions of the cloud, right? Like that, we'll have to identify different categories of things in your architecture and see what can be deeply integrated with the cloud versus what can be, which is something generic, right? Only certain aspects you can make it that way. Like, let's say .NET application. If the .NET application is containerized and if it's running in Docker, it doesn't matter where does it run, right? It can run on Azure Web App or Azure Container App or AKS or AWS EKS or wherever it can run, right? That's one sort of attaining portability. So portability is one of the things we can consider. And when you make a choice of databases, again, think through if that database is available in other clouds, right? Don't go for something which is very specific and available only in one cloud. Because at least from the code perspective, from your wiring up to the database perspective would remain the same. For example, if you choose a Cassandra instance, you can run it on Azure Cosmos, or if you go to maybe AWS, you can run it on its equivalent version there, right? But your code and your product is not going to change. It'll be more about the providers that you are going to use to connect to your database, and everything is going to change, right? That's why we need to identify these pockets of different features or functionality in the application, and then try to put the right designs there. Yeah.
Absolutely. And another important factor is this is not a decision you would make at an application level, right? This is something you need to decide at an enterprise level. Which part of my enterprise is where I would want to go multi-cloud? And to really take it one step even further, actually, multi-cloud itself has multiple definitions, right? So what does multi-cloud mean? Does it mean that parts of my application run in one cloud, another part runs in another cloud? Or is it that the same application as is can run in AWS, Azure, or Google Cloud, right? So over here, I think we are talking about running parts of the applications in different clouds. But if we are really looking at running the same solution in different clouds, then we are probably talking about cloud agnostic solutions, right? So it does not matter what the infrastructure is, you should be able to run it.
So that's a slight difference, multi-cloud versus multiple clouds, right? So multiple clouds is where we'll define, okay, here, I build this entire thing in this stack, and this stack is available in any cloud, I can support it and then I run it. But multi-cloud is again one level above that, right? So that's where we decide, maybe the application perspective, I want to run my application Azure, but from the data layer, maybe I want to run it in AWS and GCP, for example, right? So that needs a different level of thought process and thinking and then architecting stuff, yeah. And in my view, going to multi-cloud is the first step. Multiple clouds is at least the first step, so that we know how we can design an architect in such a way that it is more portable than sticking to one of the clouds, and then we can start looking to the next level. That will be like a progression, I would say. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
getting into multiple clouds may not increase my cost of my application, or the resource utilization is going to get higher, right?
Sorry,
The
can
thought-
you?
So the question is, if I go to multi-cloud, is it going to increase my cost? Right? That's a question, right?
Yes. Yeah.
Of course it will.
Yeah.
There's no short answer, right? See, again, it's a trade-off again, right? What you're trying to achieve, again, going back to the drivers part, right? So cost is just one aspect of it, right? What are the benefits you're going to achieve by going multi-cloud? That is what is going to break even that, right? Are you okay to pay that additional amount to ensure that you are able to bring a multi-cloud solution so that you are not really tied to one vendor, or you want to get the best of different vendors, etc., right? Some of those if you want to achieve, for sure, we'll have to slave additional bucks. Even in one cloud, for example, let's say if you're on Azure, right? And if you have created a database in one region, you pay X. You replicate the data into another region, you pay 2X, right?
Yeah, I can.
But because you need that availability, resiliency, and all of those things, right? To ensure a geo-distributed application, we have to pay additional, and then we are taking the basic help of the cloud providers and then achieving our NFRs, right? So in that sense, if you are now doing that across multiple clouds, obviously, again, you also need to think about the egress and ingress between these two clouds. If at all the data moves between these clouds, right? That's where, like he called out, we need to clearly architect where my application should reside, where my data should reside. Am I having too many ingress and egress between these different clouds? All of those things also need to be considered for sure.
Yeah, I think fundamentally the concept of multi-cloud in the sense of cloud agnostic comes from loose coupling, right? So you don't really want to be coupled to a specific thing. I mean, starting with low-level design, high-level design, architecture, wherever we go, whenever you put an architect in the room, the first thing we'll try and do is to make it loosely coupled. How do I separate it out, right? So the moment somebody says I'm tied to AWS, the first question will be, okay, if I'm tied to AWS, what are the things I can do to this? I mean, to put a layer in between so that I'm not really tied to AWS, but I can switch to Azure or Google Cloud. The switch might not happen at all, but as an architect, I would always want to be thinking about, okay, what if there is a need to switch, right? So it's like that thing about loose, like if I go to the code level, right? We always want to create an interface and then create an implementation. 99% of the times, we would not change the implementation which is associated with an interface, but still, we would in our mind, we would want that flexibility. So I guess the discussion about multi-cloud right now is still at a
naive stage.
Exactly, very naive stage.
I mean, even if you look out in the industry's white papers, also not many have truly accomplished a multi-cloud solution yet, right? Like it's all mostly multiple clouds is where people are moving towards. That's why I say that's like a linear progression. Let's look at how we can move a solution to multiple clouds, and then, but it doesn't mean if you are multiple cloud ready, you can be multi-cloud ready. Okay, that's not what I'm trying to say. It both needs different mindset and architecture principles, but the thing is, at least, yeah, we need to start thinking on those lines first.
So even if, let's say, I say Kubernetes is cloud neutral and I have my everything built around Kubernetes. If, let's say, I'm using infrastructure as code to create a Kubernetes cluster, the infrastructure as code scripts you would write for Azure are completely different from the infrastructure as code scripts. I mean, Terraform scripts you write for Azure will be different from AWS, will be different from Google Cloud. So yeah, it's still, I would say, very early. I mean, obviously enterprises would want that because they don't want to be coupled to a single cloud, but it's just, we are still at the start of the journey.
Yeah. One other point is like maybe each and every service, they're giving a very high SLA. If you compare Azure, the PaaS service, whatever the SLA they commit is 99.49. Somewhere if you go for a geo redundancy and sort of things, right? But still you will consider it as a multiple cloud.
So if you understand the question you're asking, all of these Azure services or any cloud provider for that matter, they provide 99.49 SLAs. So considering that, do we still need to go with multi-cloud? Is that the question, right?
Right, yeah.
That is what. So like I said, going back to drivers, are we going to multi-cloud because of the availability issues or for any other issues, right? If it's only availability issues, you are spot on. I wouldn't really go for that, right? See, I mean, I'll always take this example. In the data centers, nobody cared about how many nines we had, the availability, right? But when we move to cloud, we think 99.95 is good, and then we want to push further to 99.99. And if that itself is not enough, then first fix the data centers to get to that level, right? Nobody looks at that part. But still, we want to go with multi-cloud, right? I'm not against multi-cloud. I'm just telling practical reasons. And
it also depends on the use case, right? If your use case is for your use case, if availability is so important that you are the extra additional 9 is really, really important for you, and you are ready to, I mean, the thing is, when it comes to availability, each 9 you add will multiply your cost by 10. Right? It's not going to be a
cost is the main factor when you
I mean,
consider just
it's not going to be a small investment. Like each 9 you would want to add to, let's say I'm spending $10 to get 99.99 availability. I would need to spend into 10 times to get 99.999% availability. So yeah, if that's the thing you want, then probably multi-cloud might be a good direction, because then like even if AWS goes down, you might be able to serve the application from Azure. But it should be based on your business need.
Thank you.
Especially from the disaster recovery perspective, it would definitely help, right? Because, I mean, though these are very, very, how to say, not so frequently happening things, right? If there is a storage outage in Azure, at that time, if you cannot afford even a 10 minutes downtime or whatever, then having your application running in another cloud will definitely help, right? Otherwise, yes. So my recommendation is also talking to him offline, right? So first thing is, in a single cloud, when we architect, we need to ensure we have covering all the availability zones and then taking care of all the multiple regions, etc., deployments, and ensure within this cloud, whatever the maximum it offers, we try to leverage that, right? Especially from availability perspective. If there's anything else beyond, of course, we need to look at differently. For this, we need to do this, and then we can look at making this replicated across multiple clouds, etc. Yeah. Because the key is the data. Even application, you can try and containerize it, make it portable, and then define it, right? How do you ensure the data present in one cloud is also replicated to other cloud with whatever the minimum latency we want? Right? That's where the key challenge would reside, which is what we are still trying to see how we can better at it and things like that. Yeah.
So apart,
Please go ahead.
Please go ahead.
So apart from this DR scenario, whatever you said, what do you think can be another real driver for multi-cloud? So multiple cloud, I understand. Okay, I have some solution, and I could have customers who prefer Azure, who prefers AWS. So I'll basically containerize everything or put it into Kubernetes and deploy it wherever I want. But what could be a real driver for multi-cloud per se? And let's say, theoretically assuming that, okay, one particular service in Azure is way cheaper than in AWS. Let's say storage is super cheap in AWS and compute is super cheap in Azure, something like that. So that could be one of the drivers. In such scenarios, would I be able to do a site-to-site VPN or direct link kind of things between clouds? Is that even possible? Or would, end of the day, doing all this, would it even add up?
Yeah. So the thing is, when it comes to having compute database separately in different clouds, right? So you are referring to having different components in different clouds with the capability of having them in different clouds when needed, as per the cost.
What other
No,
drivers?
I think the main driver typically is loose coupling, right? So you would not want to be tied to a specific vendor. For example, if you're using Kubernetes, then you have the flexibility, I mean, at least theoretically, right? Practically, there are a lot of other challenges. It's not just the Kubernetes. You have security, networking, and a lot of data, a lot of other things. But the fact that you have the opportunity to shift to other cloud, right? So that's it's the mentality of architects to have the flexibility, right? Whenever you want to build something, you want the flexibility. For example, if I'm like, we go for REST API because we want the flexibility to be able to change the implementation irrespective of the customers. I mean, irrespective of the consumers. So the same is the case in terms of the multi-cloud. I think the main driver these days, I would say, is more loose coupling than cost. I think cost would not be such a big driver right now.
Yeah, right. See, because if you're looking at cost optimization, if you're moving to the multi-cloud, bringing that solution adds additional cost as well, right? So we need to factor in that. But yeah, I would also agree to him, right? Most of the reasons I've also heard is a vendor lock-in. We want to avoid a vendor lock-in, right? We want to be more portable. That is one of the drivers which I've been hearing as well.
Could you list out some tools available like Dapper for cloud agnostic? And another question is, if it is multiple cloud, how do you establish connectivity between cloud providers?
So the question is, there are two questions. One is, are there any tools that helps in building a cloud agnostic solution?
like
Yeah,
Dapper.
I think one of the things you also told Dapper, right? That is pretty good. So it doesn't. I'm not sure how many of you heard about Dapper. Have you guys listened to a session on Dapper? Yeah. Do you guys want to answer that? Right. So Dapper is a distributed application runtime, right? So that helps you in, let's say, for example, you are building a microservices-based architecture application deployed to Kubernetes, right? And you might need access to Kafka, or you might need to have an access to maybe a storage or anything like that, right? Typically, what we do, we have those storage settings and everything in our code as a configuration, right? And then our code connects to it, right? That means we're having tight coupling with your underlying infrastructure. That is where Dapper comes into picture, and then it helps it. It injects a sidecar, and the sidecar manages your communication between microservices or communication to Kafka and things like that. So tomorrow, for example, today you are on Azure and then you're using an event hub as your Kafka source, right? Tomorrow, if you're moving to GCP and if you want to run any other Kafka there, nothing else will change. The same sidecar container can be configured to talk to Kafka implementation of GCP, and then it just works, right? So this is from an implementation from the cloud native solution. If you're building it, you can use definitely Dapper is one of the things I've seen. Another thing is on the monitoring aspect. One is on the development side where we use this, and then how are you going to monitor it if it's running across multiple clouds? That's where things like Azure Arc, or if you're on Google, you have something called Anthos. Right? Those gives them single pane of visibility across multiple clouds. Right? Some of the tools we need to also put in. So when we talk about cloud native, all these 12-factor app, a lot of people have heard about 12-factor app. Anyone about 12-factor app? Yeah. So go through about 12-factor app principles, and then some of them, if you try to implement, we'll be able to really make our solution even more portable and agnostic, right? Yeah. And second question, I think you asked about connectivity. I think that is something, I've not done it personally, but it is definitely possible. How we typically do an side-to-side connection between on-prem to Azure and either cloud. It's very much possible between either Azure or AWS. And I'm not sure how many have heard about this. There's also this Oracle and Microsoft partnership happened recently, right? OCA. You can run your Oracle cloud DB on Oracle cloud, and there is a low latency connectivity established between Oracle and Microsoft by their partnership itself. So like that, some of these are also already available in place to establish cross-cloud connectivities, so which we could leverage depending on our use cases. Yeah. Does that answer the question?
And just to add on to that, like there are a lot of new initiatives in the observability area as well, right? So for example, open telemetry, right? Earlier we used to have separate standards for logs, metrics, traces, but with open telemetry, now you need to instrument your application once, and it would be able to send the data to the monitoring, logging, tracing tools of that specific cloud, right? If I'm deploying that application in Azure, it would be sending the data, Azure monitoring, Azure logs, and all the other services related to that. And this would be a good step as well. So yeah, it's I think it's the way we are looking at it right now is it's there in pockets, but as a whole, yeah, we are still far away.
There has to be some reference architecture coming up from Microsoft itself, maybe. We are so used to looking at those documentation. Let's say if you want to architect something in Azure, this is how the different components, this is how you'll put together. Maybe something need to come up so that all of our questions will be even more clearly answered.
Multiple things across different clouds from a security point, right? I mean, if it is single cloud, you have the complete control over the permissions, data security, and all that. But with multi-cloud, you definitely will not be able to deploy security for all individual things and monitor things. So, I mean, what is your take on that?
It's a challenge, right? I mean, there is no simple answer there. To be really,
it increases your overhead as well,
yeah,
right?
Exactly. Yeah.
Absolutely.
So even with single cloud, establishing zero trust model itself is still. I shouldn't say it's difficult, but it's still not everyone has done it there, right? So now imagine multiplying that with multiple clouds. Definitely, it's another interesting thing.
Wouldn't that cause a lot of vulnerability to your data? I mean, protection, basically. I mean, if you're suggesting a multi-cloud to one of your clients to minimize or to probably run the show even better, but wouldn't that cause a lot of security issues if that suggestion has been put forth to a client or someone for that matter?
Yeah, see, security issues can be there anywhere, right?
Yeah, I agree. But if it is
itself,
single cloud, at least you have the complete control over it.
Yeah.
But here it's completely different.
It's all about like what we answered the previous one. About the connectivity between these two clouds is one of the important aspects. What is the trust model you establish between these two? Who can talk to each other, and then on what roles they can talk to each other? That's what we need to do. And there are certain tools, I don't get the name of it. So let's say IAM, for example. Azure AD is one of the IAM within Azure, right? Like that each cloud provider has for themselves. There are also other cross-cloud tools which are available, which can enable these security mechanisms across these multiple ones. I'm not getting the name right away. Maybe, yeah. We need to start looking at those things because these are some of the common problems which everyone is already thinking about it. So these security solutions we've been building so far. They're also coming up with something which can run across, all the clouds, or run on top of all these clouds, and then get them into the individual cloud security modules. Yeah, that's how we can start addressing them.
I have doubt regarding both. Swaminathan, we discussed on database for DevOps thing, and I can see Kubernetes hero and DevOps hero. So my doubt is, for databases, can we take a snapshot, like kind of a backup, and create a custom image based on that backup, and we can use that in our DevOps? Is it possible?
So for databases, can we take a backup and then?
No, backup snapshot. It's kind of VM snapshot. We take a database snapshot and create a custom image out of that snapshot. Is it possible?
When you say custom image, you mean another VM you want to deploy?
Another Docker image.
Okay.
With our store procedure functions, everything as per that SQL, what is there in on-prem or anywhere. We create a kind of a snapshot. Like VM, we create a snapshot.
Yeah.
Same way, we create a snapshot of database and create a Docker image out of that, and we use that in our DevOps.
Not fully, right? So the reason is, let's say if you're using Azure SQL Pass DB, for example, right? The way that takes backup is different from how your SQL managed instance uses it.
Correct.
Okay. And these backups are not like a typical backups what we used to take in the on-prem system, right? Where we'll have this back file or LDF, MDF files we have, which we take and then you import it into another database, right? That's not fully possible there, right? And also these, you don't have access to storage there, where it is really have. You can't really see this actual backup files, right? It's only via the portal or via the APIs you'll be able to restore it into another DB, right? So if your use case is to use some of these repeatedly, you want to create a DB, and if you want to use it repeatedly in your CI/CD pipeline to perform testing, then that is something you need to create via a Terraform or something, and then, or maybe if it's a Docker image, for example, right? Spin up and SQL in a Docker image, and then run your DDL scripts against that image and get all the schema ready. Then run your application test against that particular database. That would be easier. Because even within Azure SQL DB, for example, if you're going with hyperscale tier, which is the one which can take data up to 100 TB, so right? The way that takes backup is completely different from your general purpose or business critical tier takes the backups. You can't really use the backup of one tier and then create another tier of database, etc. So since all of this is handled under the hood by Azure, we can't really have much leeway to do that. Anything else? So who all are ready to build cloud agnostic solutions now? So one question to Ranga. So how do I start learning about cloud, multi-cloud or cloud agnostic? I know you are a learning guru, so.
Swami, it's a very difficult question, right? So let's take two scenarios. One is you are a beginner to cloud and you are using a specific cloud in your enterprise. In that kind of scenario, the best thing I would recommend is to spend 1 or 2 years becoming a master at the cloud, right? So that's the number one thing. Like, it does not matter if you know 3 clouds or 5 clouds. The most important thing is how good you are at one of the clouds, right? So I would say spend 1 or 2 years becoming a master at one of the clouds before you venture into another cloud platform. However, if you're working on a cloud, you get an opportunity to work on another cloud, go ahead, do it. The most important thing for me is learning is good, but unless you apply it, you will not remember. It's like a muscle, right? If I go to a gym, try to develop a muscle, as long as I do the exercise, I'll retain it. But if I stop doing it, within a few months, I'll be back to normal. The same is the case with learning as well. So even though I know a specific cloud, if I'm just learning a cloud just for the sake of learning it, I'll forget it within a little while. And especially for beginners, if you're switching from one cloud to another cloud, you will get really, really confused because there are a lot of new concepts that you would learn. And sticking with one cloud for a long time will help you get your head around it. And it's easy. I'm not saying it's difficult, right? Once you learn a cloud, another cloud becomes easy. It's just, I think it's comparable to learning programming, right? So if you're a good Java programmer, if you're a good Python programmer, learning the other language might not be as difficult as your first programming language. The same is the case with the cloud, but you need to get that feel. Like, if I'm building Java applications, then I remember everything in my brain. I'm using it every day. So yeah, the same thing. You need to get to that level of expertise before you move on to another cloud.
Get the fundamentals strong, and then we can build on top of it for sure.
Exactly, and especially because cloud is so varied, right? I mean, it's like 200 plus services in each of the cloud,
Nobody can remember
too
what
many
is
categories, right? I mean, even the most experienced cloud developers would probably touch 20 to 30 services in their career.
Yeah, that's so true. Yeah. Right. Anything else? Yeah. My friend is having a lot of questions.
You can actually speak about Terraform and other infrastructure as a service offerings from Microsoft, like Terraform. You can actually fill in some time with Terraform and infrastructure as a service solutions.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah, it's actually.
You mean to make it cloud agnostic, we can use
Yes.
something like Terraform. Yeah.
Yeah.
So while Terraform is, so one thing what I would also add to that is it's definitely good. Let's say if you're using ARM templates or Bicep now for that matter to create infrastructure, right? That particular learning what you're doing can be applied only in your Azure, the provisioning of Azure resources, right? But if you learn Terraform, that is written in HashiCorp language, right? So you learn the language and the internals of how it works, right? But what would still be different is the script what you have written, you have to rewrite the same thing. Maybe it's called a VM in Azure. Maybe it could be called an maybe S3 or whatever instance in AWS, exactly. And it could be called something else there, right? So all of your code would change, but the syntax would remain the same, and the way Terraform works remains the same. That is why you can achieve, or with a lesser learning cycle or learning curve, you can start creating infrastructure in other clouds. That's one of the good things about Terraform, right? Yeah. And if you have to also draw parallels to that, there's also something called Pulumi, right? With which you can actually use your high-level programming languages. Something like if you are a C# developer, or if you are a JavaScript developer, or if you are a Python developer, etc., right? You can write your infrastructure code in such high-level languages. And under the hood, they have this language mapping to that particular language to Terraform, and it uses those Terraform providers to create the resources. So there are multiple tools available which can help you in getting this infrastructure ground covered as well. If you want to go with multi-cloud or start with multiple clouds, yeah.
Terraform and Pulumi.
Thanks, Murugan.
Terraform and Pulumi they work with multiple clouds, but they are not cloud agnostic. In the sense that, as you were saying, it's not like the same script you write, you can use
write once, run everywhere or
exactly.
Anywhere, right?
Yeah.
Somebody had asked about databases, right? He wanted to replicate it in another environment. He can use something like Flyway, right? I just wanted to answer that question regarding that.
So I think I'm not sure if everyone is able to hear him. One of the person was asking about database migrations, right? There's a tool called Flyway, right? That can be used for database migrations. I mean, it's similar to if you're from .NET background, there is this entity framework. We have these EF data migrations. Or if you're on Java, you also have Liquibase, which also helps in doing these data migrations aspects. Yeah.
Yeah, just a follow-up of what we initially discussed. So as you said, if the motivation for going multi-cloud is to basically have the flexibility and be a little bit agnostic, so would it not make sense to use standard stuff or open source stuff running on each of these cloud provider rather than very specific stuff related to the cloud, for example, or even if you are using, let's say, CosmoDB versus what is it? And AWS is something, right? Aurora, right? So would it not make sense for me to go with Postgres provider or those kind of things? So so if at all somebody wants to really architect that way, so should those kind of things there not be their natural choice? Basically finding the common denominator and having an interface kind of separation and making your application neutral to the actual clouds, this thing.
Yes, absolutely, it does. That's what I think I called out in the beginning, right? We don't want to choose anything that's present only in one of the clouds. That's one of the first things we need to consider when we start looking at multiple clouds or multi-clouds, right? As you rightly pointed out, if I'm choosing a database like something like an Azure table, for example, just for example, I'm taking it. If it's present only in Azure, then obviously my system or application cannot be ported to any other cloud, right? As you said, Cassandra or Postgres or MariaDB or MySQL, which is present as a different, under the different name or in a different form in multiple clouds, then it's better to go with those choices, right? So that at least the data layer you are kind of not stuck. Of course, what you don't need to do, the data is the secondary, right? It's the next thing. Do I need to have my data present in MySQL and Azure as well, and then in Google as well, and then in AWS as well? that's a different challenge which we need to talk about. But at least from the application perspective, am I tying myself to only one of the database which is present in only one of the clouds? The answer is no. That's how we can start looking at that.
Just out of the box question. So everyone in the working on the different clouds. So initially we started with AWS, then the Azure came, then the Google Cloud, then IBM. Everything was coming. As of the fresher will be coming on the come from out of the colleges. As of your experience, as of your explorer, what you suggest? This is the best path you can able to be judge on your career next 10 or 15 years. Otherwise, this is the best way you can able to be tried out, or you can able to be good. So you tried out many things as of your learning path. So we are also seeing of the many things. So some guys are working on AWS, some guys are working on Azure, few guys are working on things was there. So finally we are striking on somewhere something. Hey, this is the best cloud. Oh no, this is the best cloud. What do you suggest?
I'll take the question.
Before that, I share the same sentiments as you. Okay. Now you can answer.
Okay, Azure is the best cloud. I'm just kidding, right? So this is the same debate we have all the time, right? Is Java good, Python good, Node.js good, or is it JavaScript, .NET? I mean, sorry, I should have put .NET first, being in an Azure conference. Or cloud. See, as far as a learner goes, the focus should be not on choosing the cloud. Right? It's not AWS or Azure or Google Cloud which makes a difference. It's about how good he's at that cloud that makes a difference. So the focus of anybody, it's not just the cloud, it's about learning in general. Right? If you are going to use something day in, day out in your job, then the question is, I mean, whether you are a Java developer today, whether you are a JavaScript developer, whether you are a Python developer, if you are in the top 1%, you have tons of opportunities, right? Even mainframe programmers today, if they are really, really good, if they are at the top of their profession, even those guys have like really, really good jobs, really, really good pay. So the question when it comes to technology is, you'll not be able to predict, right? Will AWS be #1 cloud, or Azure be #1 cloud, or Google Cloud be #1 cloud? I can do a poll here, and I would see there would be like at least 100 different answers. Right? There is no way anybody would be able to predict which cloud will be #1. Will Java be there in 20 years? People said Java will not be here, right? It's still surviving. Nobody knows what happens in this is not the context. Maybe Bill Gates, I mean, if you know, there's a popular quote by Bill Gates where he said 640K, not 640 megabytes, it's 640 kilobytes is more than sufficient computer memory for any computer in the world. This is what Bill Gates said, right? Today my phone has 64 gigs, right? So in technology, predicting the future is impossible. Nobody knows. If somebody tells that I know that this is going to be the #1 cloud or #1 tool or #1 platform, they are not telling you the truth.
And there's no one size fits all for sure.
Exactly.
That,
so it's about how good you get at it.
Yeah.
It's not about which one. Yeah. And from a learning perspective, the moment you link your learning to which one will be the #1 cloud, it's very difficult to learn.
I think
because you meet somebody, they would say, that's like I meet him, he says AWS is the #1 cloud. I learn AWS for 3 days. Go meet somebody who says Azure is the #1 cloud.
You could check the Gartner quadrants. That will give you an idea of how Azure has progressed in the last 5-10 years.
Exactly. Gartner is telling the past.
Yeah.
Even they don't know the future.
It's all about market share is what primarily we are approaching.
Exactly.
See, we need to look at contextually around what we are doing and where it fits, and that's how we have to make the judgment. Right?
And also, if you know which platform will be #1, tell me, because I'll focus all my efforts on creating courses in that platform. I don't need to waste my time creating content on platforms which are not going to be popular.
Okay, it's a good discussion, guys. Thank you so much.